Welcome to Terra Invicta once again, this time for the second guide video, this time on as much info about the nations and little details about them as much as I could find. I've had some amazing comments from some of you on tips on how to improve my play, and I have tried to do as deep a dive as I can into what little resources are currently available in the game. And remember, it's still early access and things are developing, and it's really balancing is a big aspect of what they're doing now in early access. Feel free to comment anything I've said incorrectly, add things to it, and tips in the comments. I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear. Thanks, and subscribe. So let's dive in and have a look at Terra Invicta nations. Let's start looking at some of the attributes of individual nations, because that's where a lot of the complexity of the game and the simulation actually occurs. Let's start with France over here. We've got the name, we've got France, we've got its flag, and it is part of the European Union. If they're not in a federation, just you don't have anything over there. Clicking on these different areas or regions of your countries, nations, you can sort of see different properties of each of those regions. So the Paris region is the capital region and core economic region, and that gives certain bonuses or negatives to different operations and stuff. So capital region means missions targeting the nation as a whole or its control points will take place here. So if you control that during wartime, it will trigger regime change and annexation. Core economic region means it grants a bonus to the economic priority. And then you've got adjacent regions, so Amsterdam, Hamburg, Vienna, and Lyon. Those will be for moving armies across to different places and for the spread of any things that would spread from a nation, let's say. So each nation has control points. It will vary based on the GDP of the nation. So some of the lower GDP nations, it goes somewhere, Somalia, one control point because its GDP is very, very low, 18 billion. If we go look at some of the largest ones, China, its GDP is 26,000 billion. What's that? 26 trillion? So that means it's got 6 different control points. So you get multiple different types of control points. I'm not going to go into every single one of them, but it is useful to look at them because they give different benefits. So you can see France has trade unions, mass media, legislature, and the executive. The executive is a special one. It means you've got control over the set policy mission in a nation. Every nation will have that. It's basically, full control of the government. And the set policy gives the ability to sort of set national directives like starting wars, ending wars, joining federations, unifying nations, and all that. So you can control every other control point but that, and you won't be able to do those actions. You need to control the executive to do that. But you'll see, hovering over these control points, you'll see if you've got the legislature, you get a bonus to the purge missions against the executive in this nation. And it defends the executive from purges if controlled by the same faction. They'll have their amounts of the incomes you'll get for controlling it, so it can be useful to see that. And you'll see then mass media gives a bonus to public campaigns, and trade unions give a benefit of orgs based in this nation cost less influence to acquire. So different orgs will have a home city, so if they're based in France, they would be cheaper. You'll see an orange number there, the cost against cap. That is your control point cap. That'll vary depending on your faction and various other points. But basically, when that cap exceeds, you're going to start costing influence to control these points. So generally, you want to keep below that or only a small amount above that's manageable with your income. Because it can be quite crippling if you go way beyond that and you have no influence. Influence is how you interact a lot with many things in the game. So having none is going to put you at a huge disadvantage. If you go to the nations tab and you look at control points, you will see the capacity of your nation and what is affecting that score. So currently in this game, there's a base cap of 350, getting a bonus from our councillor's administration, our councillor's command, our councillor's persuasion, and different researchers can give you a bonus to that as well. Different control points from different nations will have different values depending on their GDP. Smaller countries may have a much smaller cost, but they're not going to be giving you as much in return for that. maybe decide not to control certain countries if they're not going to give you enough benefit. You'll see control points also have a little star next to them. That means controlling that will give you an army as well. So something to look out for when you're picking your countries and investing your resources. You want to look at how the population will affect it. So we can look at countries like we're looking at France and their GDP. They've got a fairly good GDP and they've got a population of under 100 million. Whereas if you look at somewhere like India, they've got a population of 1.4 billion. So all the effects that they're going to get from these different developments, so like research and your priorities under the economy, your welfare, knowledge, unity, those will all be basically multiplied by the population. So because every person is contributing something in some way, a nation with a lot of population will have a massive economy. So if you're looking at getting a lot of cash money, look at your higher population countries and see how you can boost their economy. If you're wanting to get research, you'll get more research from more people producing science for you. But then you can also look at other countries that maybe they've got a very high per capita GDP. So we can look at this per capita GDP map, and you can see something like the Gulf states. They've only got 19 million people, but they're producing 1,200 billion as a GDP. That means they've got a very high per capita GDP, not much population. So you're not going to get much research. You're not going to get that kind of benefit from there. But this would be a great place for using the money that it's producing to either create a space program and create a lot of mission control and boost in that location because they've got the money to throw into it. Or some of these countries, especially like in the Middle East, and this is something that I need to actually start doing. I need to take advantage of this. They've got things like these resource regions. I've been too tempted to, want to build up a country and make it a nice place to live and all that, but that's not necessarily serving your aims as your faction. You got these resource zones. Maybe this is where you want to put your spoils in. You'll see here, completing the spoils priority grants 77.9 cash monies directly to you. So you could really just take the Gulf states and bleed it dry by doing the spoils priority on all the regions there, and you'll get a ton of money really fast. And you can use that to reinvest it in another place that you want to build up by doing the direct investments. So maybe you don't always want to be the nice guy everywhere. And I think I need to start doing that in my playthroughs. So something to also look at if you want to get more influence income, raising your global opinion or your public opinion in all nations you can, raising the average global public opinion will give you more influence income. So that can be a great way to also increase that without your counselors at all. Okay, so then all the different stats of your nations is where things can get complicated. We've got the overview, the military, the development, and the people stats. So we're going to start with the overview, and we've got the democracy score. So the democracy score affects a lot of things. It varies from full democracy all the way down to totalitarian. Basically, the higher number, the higher the democracy, representing things like civil liberties, whether there is actual freedom and elections, free and fair, all that stuff. It affects many things. So stability and cohesion, how much research you get, the amount of corruption, the economic growth, and the effectiveness of military in controlling unrest. So you see here, government increases per 2 investment points in the knowledge priority. It changes per 2 investment points in the unity priority. So you look at the unity priority, we've got knowledge and unity. You will have to balance that out to get that going in the direction you want. Too much unity and your democracy score is going to actually start decreasing, which is an interesting thing about the unity thing. It's not always beneficial. It definitely has benefits up to a certain point, and we'll look at that just now. So the government score impacts the cohesion score. The lower government score increases the cohesion score resting point. We'll look at cohesion just now, but the resting point of cohesion, so your cohesion will tend to go to a higher number, while a higher government score draws the cohesion score to a mean value of 5, so it'll try center it, and simultaneously increases research production. So the higher your government score, the more research you're going to get in a nation. Having a high government score also means the spoils priority requirement to keep elites happy reduces, so you don't actually have to put spoils in. It's actually a little bit annoying if you don't put any spoils into a nation. If it's got the warning, Turkey over here, it's in red with a little warning, meaning if you don't put enough spoils in there, there's a chance that a coup will happen spontaneously. So then we've got stability or unrest. The higher the number, the more likely there's going to be a coup. Depending on your nation and the well-being of people there, it's going to change a little bit. So if cohesion is 0, unrest rises much more rapidly. So it represents violent resistance to the political, economic, and cultural status quo in this nation. Too high and the economy will suffer, and you might have a coup or revolution, which will transfer control points or clear all of the nation's control points at once. So it's affected by low cohesion and low quality of life. So how much money people have per capita. You know, having armies and military spending can reduce it, especially if your democracy score is low. That varies. So you'll see here, if we have 3 investment points in military priority, it will decrease unrest. You'll have a different resting point depending on all the other stats, like we talked about, the cohesion and all that. So for the unrest, you generally want to keep yourself below 1.5. Once it's above that, you start getting negative effects. So we've got the GDP over here. That is the entire nation's GDP. So that's how much money the economy is producing in that country. And that determines a lot of these other things. So the amount of spending you get for the investment points produced, the income you'll get for controlling it, and all sorts of things. Also, the per capita GDP is a factor of the population versus that number. So the higher the GDP, the more per capita GDP you have. We'll talk about that in a second. So for the GDP, that also controls the amount of control points. So you'll have 1 control point if your GDP is below 90, 2 if it's above that but below 600, 2,500 will give you 3, 10,000 4, 22,005, and above that 6. Raising your GDP too high also can have the negative effect of boosting climate change, especially if you're using the spoils priority. Climate change can have a negative effect on your GDP as well. So if you notice that the world is starting to look a little bit funky, you might start having a reduced GDP, which is just not good for everybody. To maximize your GDP growth, you want more resource regions. You'll see on the map, you'll get regions that show themselves as resource regions. Like we've got in the Middle East, a bunch of resource regions. That will boost your GDP, controlling those in a nation. Higher democracy, higher education, a cohesion score closer to 5, and having as many economic regions as possible. Per capita GDP is the GDP divided by its population. So the amount of that GDP that goes to the average person. Basically gives you the value for the economic conditions for the average citizen. So a low value for that means unrest is going to be high. People are having poor living conditions. They're not getting their needs met. So you want to raise that up, and that it will be affected by things like inequality and climate change, loss of populations, war, and all that. So you'll see that will be listed over here. Per capita GDP, the gross domestic product divided by its population. Per capita GDP increases per 1 investment point in the economic priority, and that's this one over here. Population, since we covered that, the per capita GDP, your people is your population in the nation, and you can see there it's 58 million in France. We've got 36 million in Saudi Arabia, 1,449.7 million in China. You see there's also a value for the estimated population growth. So it's 0.22 in China, 0.63 in France. So that's how much your population will grow. Your population will grow and shrink. Getting blown up by nukes will decrease your population. So the higher your GDP per capita means your population growth will increase. If your education or democracy is above 4.08, that reduces your growth. That's just something you would actually see in reality. If it's a developed country, it will grow faster at 5 cohesion. So you want to keep around 5 cohesion again. When xenoforming happens, I'm not going to go into detail for the spoilers, but that will reduce population growth. And of course, nukes will reduce your population growth. So that little percentage value will then see if your population is increasing or decreasing. Okay, since we're looking at the people graph over here, we're talking about education. You see this, got this little education stature saying advanced, 8.17. The years of schooling a citizen has in the nation, a higher score produces more research, and they're more resistant to extreme propaganda, but gain less cohesion from the unity priority. So this is increased by doing the knowledge priority, investments in education, and the free flow of information. So fighting propaganda. Different values. If it's below 5, it will be limited education. If it's 5 to 8, it will be called developed, and 8 to 10 will be called advanced. So it is one of the largest factors that influences the research output, other than the population producing. So the more population you have with the higher knowledge you have, the more research you get. So basically, you want to have more population to get more science out of your country. So the next one, we've got a little cohesion. This will have a value that it tends towards in your nation. Again, in general, you want to have this at a 5 value, but basically it represents the level of unity or conflict among the people of the nation. This includes cultural, ideological, ethnic, and religious similarities and differences. High values describe a unified society that brooks little deviation or dissent. So think a very autocratic and controlled nation. Middle values represent a diverse society that has both internal conflict and a healthy, creative counterculture. Middle to low values represent a high degree of political polarization, and the lowest values mean that the nation's people are fragmented or even tribal. High values keep unrest in check and increases the nation's ability to resist occupation, while middle values provide a bonus to the national research production. So it means, people have a more free-thinking way of doing things, more original thought, basically. If you want research, you want to keep that a middling thing. If it's too high, it's sort of a stifling of thought and innovation. So high democracy will pull this to a middle value. Unity will increase it. You can see where it will tend towards in your nation, and knowledge will center it to 5. It's quite a complicated one, but just think of it like this. If it's below 4, unrest is going to increase. If it's between sort of 4 and 7, research will be increased. If it's above 7, your unrest will decrease and occupation will be harder, be thought of harder. So maybe if you're not so much interested in research, put that score up. So you lower it with a lower government score, inequality, low per capita GDP, low population, losing your armies, and if you don't have a high public opinion over controlled place. It's centered by high government score and the knowledge priority, and it is raised by low government score, unity, being at war, and having rivalries with other nations. It's a very complicated one. There's a lot of factors that go into this, but that's about as simple as it gets. So then we've got the little public opinion graph over here in my little test game for this. I'm just doing the 3 factions, so it's the servants and the resistance. You can see there the score of the support for the different factions and undecided. Having a high public opinion for your own faction means it will be easier to capture things. People will be happier, and you will get more influence if you are more supported there as well. This is why you would do the public campaign mission, which will then shift the opinion towards you. If you do atrocities in war, launching nukes or whatever, that will shift public opinion away from you. So then the other thing we've got over here is inequality. We've got the public, and then you also have elites. Elites, those rich buggers. How unequal a nation is a measure of how the wealth and income is distributed in the nation. High values mean the nation doesn't have much of a middle class, so most of the money is with just a handful of people, and the poor have almost nothing. It grows as a product of normal economic activity, the economic priority, but a lot of it comes from corruption, which is the spoils priority. Resource regions in a nation can contribute to inequality. Being too high reduces cohesion, as the nation divides into haves and haves not, countered by use of the welfare priority. So if you're finding your inequality is too high, improving your welfare will do that. It also counters global environmental hazards, reducing the greenhouse gases your nation is producing. So, yeah, welfare will have a warning if inequality is increasing. Corruption, as I mentioned there, it's also a hidden stat in the game. Basically, what percentage of the economy is diverted to the elite buggers. How it works then is if you are getting that warning with the spoils, it means that money is then going to be used for coups and purges against you. So it sort of makes things harder for you. If they are satisfied, however, it means they're going to use that money to keep you in power. So corruption, yeah. Less educated, less democratic elites demand more spoils. Maxed out education and democracy will pretty much remove corruption completely. Okay, so that's a lot. Then we've got the actual income you're getting from the nation, the development score over here. These are all sort of the incomes you're going to get. And it's basically divided into the investment points. So this is the economic surplus distributed by factions with control points. This number will be divided up by each of these pips in here. If this is 13.4 and it's getting 17% of the priority, it'll be 17% of that value going towards economy, meaning that number's going to raise by however many investment points fills up in there. That makes sense? You get these priorities that you then split up to go into all these different things: economy, welfare, knowledge, unity, military, spoils, funding, boost, mission control, building an army or nuclear weapons, starting a space program if you don't have the boost thing there. If we go to some country that doesn't, you see that will be the space flight program instead of boost and mission control. If you don't have nuclear weapons, you'll have the nuclear weapons thing, starting a nuclear weapons program. So it costs a little bit more to get that started. Otherwise, you'll be producing nukes. Look at that just now. So if you have a lot of armies, you're actually going to have a lower amount of investment points that you can spend because, some of that's going towards controlling armies. Something to consider is maybe you don't want so many armies if you're not actively using them. High unrest also reduces the investment points you get there. So ideally, to get the maximum number out of this, you'd have no armies, no navies, and 0 unrest. So the other things here are the funding that you're getting out of. So that's the money that you'll be earning coming out of this nation. So it's producing 13.3 excess. Each control point will get a split of that, as well as the federation will get a share of that. It says, if the nation is part of a federation, it shows the shared funding and boost granted to the nation, which are substitutes for the domestic values. So it actually replaces what you would earn from the share you get out of the federation. So this money goes into the federation and is split based on its share it gets out of the federation. So we covered most of the priorities over here. So economy, welfare, knowledge, unity. Military will give you improvements to your internal security and military technology. So that's lowering unrest depending on your democracy score, and increasing miltech, so military tech level. Miltech will go up faster in nations with no unrest and will show with a warning symbol if the unrest is increasing or if it's in a civil war. So what is miltech? It's basically the military technology value of the armed forces of the nation. Each 10th of a point in miltech represents a 10% improvement in combat capability. So miltech increases by a certain value per investment point in miltech. You get a maximum value. Currently it is 5. And you get certain global technologies that can increase that. Some high-tech stuff, cybernetics and future technology, coil guns and all sorts of cool things. Certain nations will be further behind, so atomic age or industrial age or whatever. So the next thing you see there is strategic nuclear barrages. The number there is how many nuclear barrages you can launch, and those will be launched at a different region, which will then do massive damage to the environment and the economy of a region. You can only launch these if you have the executive control of a nation. But remember, that will cause an atrocity and lower public opinion of you around the world. And you've got navies over here, so France has freedom of the seas. A higher naval score than its enemies will be able to transport ships across the ocean. It will be shown as blockaded if it's lower. And your armies will have navies attached to them or not, meaning they can go across the ocean. So the game starts with two major federations existing, the European Union and the Eurasian Union. So the Eurasian Union is Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan. EU, France, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Germany, Italy, Spain, Benelux, Alpine States, Poland, Portugal, Sweden, Finland, Ireland, Northern Balkan States, Baltic States, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Greece. You can, however, add additional countries to them. Some nations can choose to join a federation if they are eligible. And then there are new federations that you can unlock with global techs later on. So you can get, the African Union, Nordic Federation, all sorts of things. It can be very cool. So what you can do is when you've got a federation, you can unify, basically meaning if you have a nation that is part of a federation, you can unify them into one large country. So that will average out things like the Miltech value between the two nations, and meaning you have to just control less control points. If you do merge with two countries that are only partly claimed, so if you've got you want to merge the EU and the Eurasian Union, you might find some countries that the EU doesn't have a claim on will fall out and become breakaway states, so watch out for that. You can see regions that have claims on them by just going into the regions tab, and you can see what have claims on by different nations and different federations. So the regions tab is a very useful thing, so you can see where a lot of your population lives, where your boost is coming from, where your mission control is, and what your claims are. So if you ever want to know if you can do a unification with a different nation, don't waste your influence by just saying do a set national policy event willy-nilly. What you can do is you can just go to the relations tab and you can see, well, I want to merge Russia with Kazakhstan. So you can just go there and say, let's look at Kazakhstan. Unification requirements with Russia fail. They are in the same federation. Russia has a claim on Kazakhstan's capital region. Russia executive faction must control all control points in Kazakhstan. Must be in a federation until 25 September 2023. So you can see that they've put in a little limit there that you can't do these mergers until after 2023, which is just to prevent you spamming these out right at the start of the game and becoming overpowered. And both nations' executive factions must have taken power by force or held power for 180 days. So you can't just take a country and merge it. You need to wait for 180 days. You will see in a nation that will be a little pop-up saying that the executive thing is still consolidating power or something. And that's how you know that you can't do that. But it's a nice way to see that. So if you want to do like the unification, you can just go there and see if it passes. If it fails, then you don't need to go and do that set policy thing. And you can also see there alliances, ending alliance, leaving federation. So you can leave the federation if you wish, which might be a good idea because Kazakhstan is giving away 2.2 of its boost to the federation. So you can get a lot more boost out of Kazakhstan if you leave the federation and just have that yourself. If you control Russia, you would get more of it, however. So, as I said, we've got the set policy thing, so you can declare war with a nation, you can seek peace, you can grant independence to different nations, you can cede territory to an enemy, so if they've got a claim on some of your territory, you can cede it to them, and rivalry will be ended. You can disband an army, you can disband nuclear warheads, you can declare independence from a parent nation, you can leave a federation, you can join a federation, or you can unify. And there is a cooldown on doing this, so you can't just spam doing some of these things over and over again. There are texts to lower that cooldown as well. Okay, I think I have covered most of the things under here. If you have any other questions, please let me know. It's very difficult to cover all the things in this game. It's a very complicated game, but that's what makes it so cool. I know I said I was going to do all the different missions that you can do in a country, but I think this video is already going to be long enough as it is, so I think that will be a separate. I did do a little short on the advised mission. Let me know if you prefer that format. We can see what works. Thanks for joining in, and check you next time. Bye.